perform there. I'm a preacher too. I performed a wedding about 3 years ago, and I said, at the time you all started having some babies, they said, we can't afford to. I said, why? One went to Harvard, the other went to Syracuse, and they said, we've got $350,000 of student debt between us. Now that's something different than you and I grew up under. My wife got her master's here at Queens College for less than $50 a year back when she did it. 1960. It used to be that in New York and in California, that we understood that it was better to invest in keeping the cost of education low, to get people as much education as possible. And then, when they got educated, they'd pay taxes to keep the system going and growing. They would become consumers that would allow our economy to expand. But under the guise of conservatism or something, whatever Fox News is preaching, we have come to feel that we are no longer our brother's keeper, that it's every man for himself. We've gone from a humanitarian, democratic capitalism to a laissez-faire capitalism where, you know, dog eat dog and the devil takes the scraps. And I say, in a time of diversity, people are becoming more and more insecure. In a time of globalization, we become frightened and we begin to turn inward. America has never been an inward-turning nation. Whenever we turned inward after the First World War, and that's the reason we had a Second World War. America has to lead the world, so we have to turn out toward the world. We have to have diversity in our schools because our students have to be prepared to lead in a diverse world. And if we don't have diversity in our schools, unconsciously, our children are growing up culturally retarded. Now, the enemies are out there. Not here, not in your school system, but Texas has a big school system. And Texas has decided, because they buy more textbooks than anybody else in the world, they're going to rewrite the textbooks that are published that your children will be educated under. And you, with 125 school districts, have no buying power. And so you will be programmed by whatever George Bush and his friends decide is a good education. And people who are reasonable, people who are intelligent, people who are struggling to give leadership to the world in which we live, have got to continue to know that there is a struggle, that truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, Martin Luther King used to say. But that scaffold sways the future. For behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. And I've come to think of you, whether you're Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, people of values. Whatever those values are, those values understand that human beings are more than flesh and blood. And that there is something beyond the material things to which we find ourselves devoted. So it doesn't make sense when you can educate a child for $10,000 a year or $12,000 a year to pay $50,000 a year to send him to jail. And so I think to erase racism, we've got to make some business arguments. We made those in Atlanta. It was kind of hard, but when we built our airport, we said every single contract is going to have at least 25% minority and female participation. That upset a lot of people, but it also opened up an economy to a whole lot of people. We were a city of about 1 million when we made that decision. We're now a city growing on close to 6 million, 25, 30 years later. And the reason is that because we included everybody in our economy, we brought in 1,100 firms, international firms, relocated in Atlanta. Not because we were advertising the fact that we were inclusive racially, but because we were inclusive racially, we had very little crime, we had good schools. We also found that white women were not doing any business with the government until we opened it up. And so the creation of women-owned firms by single parents. Now we have some of the biggest construction firms even are run by women who never would have had an opportunity until we began to think of an inclusive economy. Well, that 1,100 businesses ended up bringing $70 billion into the city of Atlanta during just the 8 years I was mayor. And that $70 billion created 1 million new jobs. And you can imagine what new jobs did for housing and other job opportunities. Now that was just the 80s. And because we were going so well in the 80s, we worked up enough nerve to reach out and bring in the Olympics in 1996. So, in the day we won the Olympics in 1990, 3 more corporations relocated in Atlanta. That very day. And there's been a continued economic growth and development as a result of us beginning to work together. Now, it's not that we were any better than anybody else, but we were blessed with corporations that were locally based. In fact, it was largely Coca-Cola. They didn't want Atlanta to end up like Birmingham or Little Rock. And so they put up their own money. The business community decided we're going to take the lead in desegregating Atlanta. We're not going to put it on the children in the schools. We're going to integrate the Chamber of Commerce first. And we're going to create an interracial committee of business people, black and white, that are going to meet together once a month on a Saturday morning with no agenda. And we're going to talk through all of the problems of our city. And we're going to anticipate the difficulties and as business people do what we can do to head them off. And so it was largely because people grew up in such an extremely racist environment that they knew they could not rest on their laurels, that if it were not for their leadership, the others would take over.